All right, welcome back. We are MDEV1001, Mobile Data Management in the summer 2023 semester at Georgian, and it's week 9, part 2 of our broadcast, and this part is the theory piece. I want to talk about what we've done and why I've made the choices I've made, and let's discuss it by looking at the code, right? So now I know this is a little backwards. Sometimes what you'll have is in a lecture, you'll have all the theory first, and then let's get to coding. But I find in this case, it's probably better if we don't do it that way. And let me explain the code first. So I'm going to go into my movie CRUD view controller first and talk about my decisions. So one, we had this fetch movies method from before, right? Remember this? That was last week. We had fetch movies method. And what we did was we used a completion closure. We talked about completion closures. And this is calling the fetch movies method right now. And it's using something called dispatch queue to run on the main thread by using dispatch queue main async, right? And the reason why we need to do this, because we're using an API, is because the asynchronous nature of JavaScript and the online world. We're making a request to the server, and it's going to do a full trip, a full round trip is what it's called, right? Request, response, okay? That's what's happening here. And so that's why we need to use this thing. And we also made this display error message last week. This is all from last week. And then here's our fetch movies method. And for the most part, it remains unchanged. Nothing is different than what we had last time. This is the exact same API for listing a movie. Okay? That's what it does. So nothing has changed there. We also had our table view cell in our custom table view cell here. Again, up to this point, nothing has changed. Where things change is where it says new for ICE 8. Okay? Where we've kind of done this before. This is our perform segue, and perform segue is the way when we, press a button, or we press a row inside the table, it will trigger the segue for us to go from our main view controller to our detailed view controller. Let's call it what it is. That's what it is, a detailed view controller, right? And then we also integrated our left swipe gesture, right, where we want to do a deletion. And for the most part, you can see that this is identical. This code is identical to in-class exercise 5 up to this point. Where it becomes hairy is when we come further down. If I want to do an add button pressed event, okay? Again, when I add my button pressed, actually up to this point, still the same. There's no differences there. The prepare for segue is where we've made some changes, and it's right in this little spot right here. Remember last time? I said that there's a difficulty in making us update our table when we come back from the segue, right? And what we did was we made a reference to the movie view controller. Last time we called it data view controller. That was the first iteration of this thing. And we made a reference to it inside of the detail view, which is our add edit view controller. We made a reference to it, and we said, okay, well, access this update function over here. That function doesn't exist anymore, all right? Because we're using asynchronous code, we need to use the same completion closure in order for us to do this. And we need to have it work on the main thread. Otherwise, what's going to happen is it's going to work asynchronously. And the reason why we're using a dispatch queue is we're waiting. I'm not going to say it's blocking, but we're waiting for one thing to update before you can actually update the table. So you might see a delay if you did the update. It'd be like a little bit of delay. Oh, there it is, right? And the reason for this is because it's got to be on the same thread. We're using the main thread. If we do it on a separate thread, what's going to happen is it's going to try and update the table before we have the data, and then we're going to have an error. So that's why we had to do it. We had to change this. And what we've created is a movie update callback, all right? And the movie update callback is basically pointing to this little function right here. And it is really almost like a subroutine that's working within our function itself, our prepare function. That's what it is. So we're saying, hey, now could I have made this different? Yes, I could have made it a named function that I assigned separately. Here, there's only one function that uses it, which is the prepare function. And for the most part, what we're doing is we're setting it up so when we prepare for segue for the first time, then it does this. So this could have been a separate function call or function, because that's what this is here. The movie callback, when we have curly braces, what we're doing is we're creating a function, right? That's here. And what this is doing is saying, hey, when this is called fetch movies. And because fetch movies is doing a completion closure, so then we have the completion closure syntax in here, which uses the dispatch queue right here. This is an important piece to it right here, because this dispatch queue keeps everything on the same thread when we're reloading the data in the table. It is required, okay? And then for the most part, the rest is the same. Here's our show the delete confirmation alert. That's the same as last time. Delete movie. This is interesting because this is the one operation we're doing in our movie view controller, or movie CUD view controller, is the delete movie. Notice we use the movie ID for this. Just like I said, we're deleting a movie by ID. That is our API, okay? And in here, we have to specify the request type. Here's the request type, delete. Why? Why am I doing it this way? Well, let me show you the white box. Here's let me show you the what the API looks like that I built for you, just really briefly. Again, I don't need you to remember this. This is simply for your context, so you understand where I'm going with this thing. Okay, so here is the actual API. All right, so I've didn't show you this too much last time, but I'll show you to this time. So the API route looks like this, all right, where you have, this is JavaScript or TypeScript. You have list, find by ID, you have an add, you have an update by ID, and you have a delete by ID, and then you have some other things we're going to get into next week, which is register, log in, and log out. We have all those, those are all the API calls, okay? Now, one thing I haven't done with this API is I haven't created a key or some kind of documentation for it. I'll try, okay? It's just time. But the point is that, you know, whether you're registering, log in, and log out, this is what you're looking at. And so one thing to note is the method, delete, put, post, and get, right? All these are specific. And I specifically made it more difficult for myself because I just didn't use post the entire time. I could have just said post, 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 and it would have been done, right? But no, I wanted to make it difficult. So I used delete for deleting, put for updating, post for adding, and get for, you know, displaying, which is what we should be doing. That's the normal way of doing it, right? So any kind of processing is post, right? As an example, that's posting, but any updating and stuff like that is put. Okay, that's the real way of doing it. So now because of this, delete is the method. That is the method that we're using. And I have a separate controller for this here, which shows me what each of the things do. So what I'm waiting for is for me to sanitize the array from the request body parameters that I'm getting from the form data. Now this could be from a form on the web, or it could be from a form in iOS. Here's the beautiful thing. iOS actually sets up a similar form structure. It actually uses the request body to store stuff in the API, so that we can use the same API that we're making, we're using for the web for iOS. How about Android? Right? You're gonna explore that little thing. That's your exploration for you to explore Android and see if it does as well. Things that you can't do. You have no access to this API. This is actually private. So you have no access to change anything in the API, right? You do have access to update the data and destroy my database. Please don't do that, all right? Like I said, it'll just make it ugly for other students to use, right? So don't do that. Add to it. You can add your own movies. And if what I'm asking you to do is add your movie, modify your movie, delete your own movie, and then clean up after yourself when you're doing your testing and showing stuff on your in-class exercise, okay? Please don't destroy the data. If someone destroys the data, right, that's not nice. Okay, so by the way, if you show that in your video, I know who you are, but don't do it, okay? So this is the update movie, and you can see that I also have add movie as a separate function that does pretty much almost the exact same thing. Here, notice there's a movie ID, title, and so on. We're updating. We also need the ID _ ID for the thing. So you can see that the API mirrors what we're doing on the iOS side, okay? The funky thing that I had to figure out was this sanitize array function. I added the sanitize array function because, and this is a wrinkle that I added in, not because I needed to do this, because I wanted the genre, writer, actor, and all that stuff to be an array of strings, all right, on the server. Okay, that's what I wanted it to be. And so if we look at MongoDB Atlas to see the data on the server, let's take a look at that. MongoDB Atlas. And again, I'm showing you this so that you understand my thinking, right? So that you can say, well, maybe I would have decided to do it differently, Tom. Okay, I'm good. I'm okay with you doing it differently. Okay, so let's browse our collections. This is our collection, right? And you can see that here we have our collection. You can see that the directors, the writers, and the actors are all arrays on MongoDB Atlas. That's how they're actually being stored. This is actually the database up online. Okay. So if this is true, that is going to color our decisions, change the decisions we're going to make when it comes to programming, right? So going back to this, then we need to issue the HTTP method, the method type that we want to use. Our method type in this case, because we're deleting, is delete. We're passing in the movie ID so that my API takes that movie ID, which is a parameter, request.body.params.id, right? I'm taking that ID and I'm using that ID to search the database, match it, and then delete it, okay? That's what it does, okay? So the heavy lifting is the black box that's happening in your API, all right? Here, we also have to say something like, well, okay, now that we're doing this, let's actually issue the tasks. So the task is here, and we're saying, okay, we want to issue the task request. Here's the request. And we're going to pass in the data, the response that we're going to get back, and so on. And what we're saying is, if there's an error, then somehow we failed to delete the movie. Otherwise, we want to dispatch queue on the main thread, right? And we want to do a movies.remove at index path row, which is actually removing the movie from the array that we've established up here. So up here at the top, right, you can see that we've made an array of movies, and now we're deleting that movie from the array. Okay, that's what we're doing here. We need to, because if we don't update our local data, that is our local data. We're actually using in-memory data for the array. We're not storing it in core data. Which means if we lose connectivity, right, and you try and do an update or delete, it's not going to work, okay? Like you're in a bad spot, bad place or whatever. Okay, and so then we want to do the delete rows. We not only want to remove the movie from the array, but we also want to delete that row. We have to manually do this, right, because we're removing something from the table, okay? And then we do a task resume, and then what task resume does is we give back control to the process. We say, okay, process, I'm done. You can go back to the next task, right? So that's how it does it. And that's your delete movie task. And for the most part, we do the exact same thing on the update movie and add movie, okay? One thing that we also have to talk about is, well, okay, so where is the update, right? How does this update the table? Well, we do a manual update right here. This is the way we deal with it. We manually update. Instead of calling our thing right here, which is our movie update callback, we could reload the data and it would do the same thing, right? Table view reload data. But because we're deleting, I found that this method worked best. That's the reason why I did it. Not because it can't be done in a different way or this is the only way, but I found this just flowed for me when I was writing, and I was like, this is good, okay? Okay, so that is it for any questions around this part. Yes?
So where does ID play a picture? Why are we editing the ID?
So the reason why the ID, you mean movie ID?
Yeah, the new ID.
This one, movie underscore ID?
Yeah.
Underscore ID is something that gets created for you when you add an object into the database. You don't have control over that. It creates a hash. We talked about this. That's really long, right? And that hash code gets added in automatically. You have no control, right? So that's what's happening there. And so that is the identifier that identifies that document, right? And that's why we have to say that we want to delete or manage or manipulate that document, right? And that's how it works. So when we do a deletion, we're looking for that document. That's the first thing. And then we're deleting it. We're not doing that here. That's happening on the back-end API. The API, the way that works is, if I'm going to delete a movie, it works very similar. So here's my delete movie. I look at the ID params, right? And then I say movie delete one. That's the actual low-level command, right? And it searches for that ID. Remember I talked about this in the MongoDB discussion. And then when it searches for it, it returns a promise. If we found the ID, then delete it and return a JSON ID that we deleted, the thing we deleted, okay? Otherwise, if we didn't delete it, then return an error. That's what we did here. So it's pretty simple. There's a more elegant way of doing this where you can do validation and stuff. I just haven't had time to add it in. Sorry. All right?
The user should not be able to edit the ID, right?
No, they cannot.
You don't have any access.
You have no access to that. Right. The only ID, the only way that happens, once you delete the movie, then MongoDB Atlas, like way on the back end, if we were going to draw this out, it has access to do everything, right? And it does through by the direction of the API. So the API is the middleman, right? You send a request to the API connects to the back end, and the API can directly connects with MongoDB. You don't directly connect with MongoDB. You connect with the API. That's how it works. Okay, it's a three-way, kind of connection. That's your model view controller at work. Okay, or really what we're having is we have a view, a model view model, right? MVVM in iOS, right? And then it connects to our model view, our model controller in the back. There's no view on the back end. You can see there's no views here. It's just a model and a controller. This just connects to our API, our MongoDB. That's all it does. You'll learn how to make one of these next semester, hopefully. Okay.
Even though we have an edit option, but it won't update.
We can update it.
We're editing the movie ID.
You can.
We're not editing the ID.
Okay.
Yeah, the ID is, the movie ID is our own personal
Our
ID.
own
Yeah, we want to make our ID, we maybe want to track it for some reason. Maybe we want to make our own little ID. I just use 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, but you can make it whatever. Like you can say that this movie is coded, by title, and you can actually make it automatic too. You can say like, take the title and the time and whatever, and it kind of creates its own ID and it's in your own little database, right? But I digress. So this is
The underscore ID
yeah.
we get
from the system.
Oh.
Yeah, that's what this is. It comes from the system, an underscore ID, right? Okay, so now, back to this. So now that we've able to delete, that's the deletion part. When we swipe, it gives us a confirmation. If I press onto it, it jumps to the add edit movie view controller, this one. And here's a couple things. One, we have to have a reference to the movie view controller itself, right? The movie view controller is equal to the movie CRUD view controller. That's what this thing is, right? And the movie CRUD view controller, the reason why I kept the same name for simplicity, but I changed the name so that way we'd have a separate gist. That's the only reason why I did this, right? Otherwise, it's the exact same as we had before with some additions, right? And down here, you can see that we have the same override stuff that we did before, almost exactly the same as core data, right? Which was, we first established are we editing or what are we doing? Are we editing or adding? And now that we're editing, we're passing in from the movie data that we're getting, we're passing it into the text fields. We're just copying it in. So now you can see when you're editing that the stuff that you're editing, right? And that we're saying is, hey, do I have a movie that's inbound? If I have a movie that's inbound, right, then that's great. Then do something with it, right? If I don't have a movie that's inbound, then I'm adding something. All right, that's how we do it. Okay, next. So now that I have that, the cancel button takes us back. That dismisses everything. We know that from before. That hasn't changed. Okay, here's the real changes. The update button pressed event. Okay, so this is something that we want to do. I want to establish the request type. What request type am I making? Well, if I'm doing an update, then I'm going to do a put request. If I'm doing a add, I'm doing a post request. That's what this is doing, okay? So that's where I establish the type of request that I'm going to do. And then after I have that, I start setting up the URL information, which is really the connection, right? Based on the URL string that I'm getting and the type of request. I'm building out my request first, is what I'm doing, right? Now, I explicitly mention the types of the data. I don't have to do this. But I did it explicitly because sometimes, this is weird, sometimes Swift will really work hard to try and figure out the type because it's using type inference. And sometimes, my friends, it's just easier for you to tell it what it is. That's what I've done here. Because I noticed it was chugging when it came to building. It built for so long. And I'm like, why is it doing this? One time it timed out. It's like, it's too complex. It was too complex for Swift to figure out what my types were. I was like, yeah, no, we're not doing that. So I just kind of did this, where I said, let's just tell it what the types are. So that's what I did here, right? And sometimes this is a troubleshooting feature, right? That's what I did it, why I did it the way I did it. Notice that movie_ID is of type UUID, right? And the reason why is because when we deal with MongoDB, it needs to be a UUID. We need to specify the type when we're communicating, okay? Once we establish all those things, there is a little bit of duplication because now we're instantiating an object of type movie. And we're allocating these things we just made, we're allocating them to the movie properties, right? So first we configure them, and then we allocate them. Could we put this together in one? Yes. Sometimes it works. Sometimes it doesn't. I found that it was inconsistent. That's why I did this. Okay? This was just a decision. Next, we establish the request, right? Where we allocate the request type based on the things that we selected earlier. So here's my request type up here that we established. We said it's either going to be, here it is, either put or a post that we're going to do, right? And this is where we're using it right here. When we're ready to make the request, then we allocate the request type. And then I say, hey, set the value of the request to an application JSON request for HTTP header field of content type. All right, that's what we do. So this is kind of the way we allocate it. And then we're going to do the do catch. We're going to say, let's request the HTTP body, which is really request.body. That's what that is. Request.body is equal to our JSON encoder. We're going to encode the thing as a movie. All right, so this is how we're going to do the update.
Encode the movie as a JSON.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, that's what we're doing. That's what we're going to do our episode. So we're actually replacing everything, instantiating a whole new movie again. Why? Well, because that's what our API wants. And let me show you the API again. So again, when we're doing our update, right? And here's our update function. Literally, we're instantiating a whole new movie. Even if only one field got changed, we update all of them. Why is that? Why do we update all the fields? Only one field changed, we update everything. Why?
Works better.
Because it's easier. Because imagine you have to figure out which field got updated. How do you figure that out? You got to check every single field anyway. Well, I only want to send this much data, but in the process of me checking which field got updated, I'm spending cycles, spinning my wheels, matching stuff to see what it got updated. Forget it. Just update everything. That is the logic that we use, right? So it's very common. Okay, so request.body. This request.body stuff is what we're doing, which is what's happening right here. This is where request.body is being used. Right now, we set up the task like we did with a delete, and now this part is identical. Okay, let me say that again. This part is identical. Could there be something global that we use, a singleton, that does all that work for us? I've talked about this before. There's duplication in our code. Is there not some kind of structure, a protocol, or whatever that we can use? And the answer is absolutely. If I wanted to break this out as a reusable function, because we see it here, look, the pattern is identical here with the other pattern. Delete, update, add, it's all the same, right? The only difference is the request type that we're making, what we're doing, right? But for the most part, it's identical. So why can't we make it into a function? Maybe we'll do that if we have time. Maybe we'll do that into a singleton in the coming weeks. I don't know, right? I'm putting it off because we've been making so many changes. Like we've already had the singleton. We'd have to adapt our stuff to the singleton that I made before. I thought about it and I was like, nope, not doing that, right? Because too much work for me. So that's what we do. So that is your update function. And then for the most part, the add function looks identical to this one. Let's take a look. So this is the update. What does the add look like? Right, well, where is it? Where is the add function?
We did it, right? When we do
Well, here's the update. The update button itself decides it can do both at once. Update is, here's the add right here, and here's the update. So add and update, this function that's called update button pressed, this is the button pressing triggering the addition or editing of the code, the thing that's happening. So again, realistically, we could break these two things out into functions of their own. If you really want to compartmentalize, it might be easier to test if we're using some kind of test-driven development, right? We're not doing that. So that is what it does. It's actually really simple. If you think about what we're doing, it's way easier than core data, right? Because again, we're establishing something online, and then we're having us just use the API, right? The API actually is doing most of the work for you. You're not doing the work, right? Now, here's your challenge. Make this work with Android. Use the exact same API calls, all right, that we just used. Take this data and spin it into ChatGPT if you need to, right? But it's going to suggest other things. I recommend retrofit and Moshi, like I said last time, but you don't have to do it that way. If you found another way of doing it, you can keep doing it that way, all right? But I would do this. I would take my model, I would take my, my movie CRUD view controller, and I would take my add edit movie view controller, add them into ChatGPT, and come up with a suggestion for doing the exact same thing in Kotlin or Java, whatever you felt comfortable doing. And then check through the code and make sure it works properly. Remember, you have no access. This is the challenge. You have no access to the API. You can't even see it. All you have access to is the API endpoints, which you see here inside of your code that I've given you, right? And that is exactly what we're going to be dealing with in the future when you don't have access to those things, okay? Any questions around what I want? Okay. I think the challenge is going to be playing with the code, looking at the iOS stuff and seeing, does it look the same? Try and make your user interface as similar as possible. If you really want to challenge yourself, remember, and if you want to tell ChatGPT what your interface looks like, feed it the stuff from Xcode. So let me explain. So remember that Visual Studio Code is your friend, right, with this stuff. So if I go into Visual Studio Code again, and if I go into our ICEs and take a look at ICE 8 and pull it in, remember that you have access to this file right here, which is the main storyboard, no? Doesn't this look like XML to you? If you feed this into ChatGPT, do you think you won't know what it is? This is your interface, and if you give it this interface, you can say, I want this exact interface on Android, and this is good for your project. This is good for other things that you do. It'll take this interface and spin it up into something that might be compatible with on the Android side, because it's going to read this and understand what it is. Makes sense? That's why I'm giving you these tools, because I want you to think about this. Hey, we're making a business. I want you to spin out Android and iOS apps together in the same day. Do I really want you to work hard and recreate your user interface from scratch? Hell no. You have a designer that did all that already. Imagine if you had two designers, one for iOS and one for Android. I mean, you still need some tweaking because it may not look exactly the same, but with a little bit of help, you can come up with something that's pretty cool. Okay? So consider these things. See what ChatGPT gives you, right? Because it might give you something that's pretty cool. You can also not use ChatGPT. If you're really against it, I know some people have ethical reasons not to use it, and that's perfectly fine. Like, I'm not forcing you to do it. I'm recommending it because I think it's a new tool that's really helpful, right? So remember, this is not, I don't consider this cheating because you have a template and now you want to make your Android thing work. And my friends, like I said last week, this is going to be the new workflow. It's going to be the new workflow. We're going to be using ChatGPT and AI like that from now till whenever, and it'll be even better than we've ever seen before in our lives, right? Right now, we can't even imagine what the tools are going to be like in the future. Okay, any questions before we go for the day? See, we actually ended up early. Ha ha, an hour almost, right? Which I'm giving you back an hour of your time to do this in-class exercise. Do it now if you can. If you want to stick around, I'll stick around. If you want to do your Android application, I'll help you, right? Or you can go and do it whenever you feel like between now and Sunday. Okay? No? You want to go? Okay. I understand. All right, so that's it for me. I will post the details for the assignment, like I said, remember OMDB, right? So again, if you go to OMDB, and you want to take a look, you need to sign up for an API key. Okay, so please make sure that you sign up for the API key. Otherwise, you will not be able to use it. It does not use security, but it does use an API key that you must sign up with. Okay, so the challenge is going to be, here's your API, right? And you have to try and do some requests. I recommend using something like Postman to do this, right? So Postman, if you remember what it does, it allows you to form an API request, right? Whether it's a post request or a get request or a delete request or whatever, without any user interface. Start with Postman. See if you can actually form up a good request, right? And it gives you some examples of how this works. So here it is, okay? And it says 2017, the open API is finally open again, right? So they had it closed for a while. Now everything is free, right? But you can become a patron if you want to, or donate. So again, take a look at how it looks. And this is an example interface, right here, of how it works. Remember that you have access to view your page source at any time, right? So if you wanted to look at the page source and see how it does those things and how it puts things together, you can certainly do that, right? Take a look at that if that helps you, right? Because that's what it's doing right now. It's making an API request with that form, and you have access to actually look at everything. So let's go back to that. Remember that you can always, if I right-click on a page, you can always inspect. If you inspect that form, see, this didn't exactly go as I planned. I want to put it here. There we go. If you inspect the form at the bottom, right, you can see that there's also sources that are available here too. And sources allow you to take a look at the source. So if you look at things like your application JS, your Bootstrap, your style guide, you can look at all of them. Here's your application, and you can actually see all their code for how they did it. Okay, right here. So this is the OMDB, and then search by ID requests, right? And if you look at this, right, take a look. There's something that they're executing, right? So this is the CAPTCHA page that they're using as well, and a bunch of other stuff here. The reason why I'm recommending this is because you can see, yes, I know, you can see everything right here. This is how they did their form, and once you see this and they're doing this thing, you can actually start thinking about how you're going to do your requests with, well, you can use ChatGPT. Here's the API. This is what I want to use. This is my API key. How do I do it? And it might be able to help you, right? It's not that difficult. The difficulty is all the fields that you're going to get are different than the ones that you get from the ones we've done together, right? So again, what you want to do is take a look. Again, I use this example, and don't wait. Start working on it now before even I give you the details. It's not that it's going to be very divergent from what I'm saying, okay? So again, if I look at something like Star Wars and I make a request, then it's going to come up with the response, right? And probably because I crunched it up, that's why it looks the way it does.
You have to click the link there.
No. It's just because I crunched it up, and that's why they made a field, and because they didn't have enough room, it didn't know what to do. But you can see all the fields here. These are all the fields that it gives you, right? Genre, right? And you can see that genre itself is a string of different, things: action, adventure, fantasy. And director, same thing. Writer, you can see that they've got everything that here you can actually go through. They actually have something like English. This is a much more complex API than what I've given you, and many more fields. So please go through, analyze what you get, and then set up your model, right, for this thing. That's the challenge for assignment 3. Okay? Okay, any questions before we go? Because I'm definitely giving you back that hour that I promised. All right, guys, thank you so much. I'll see you guys next week. I'll see you guys tomorrow for the people that are here with me on the project class, and we should have a visitor tomorrow morning, if I'm not wrong. So it might be online, chances are. Right, so he'll join us online. That's going to be our associate dean, So feel free to do what you normally do. All right, and that's it for me. What was that?
I think it's like we talked so much shit.
Sure, do it.